Hey everyone, it's Matt. Welcome to Module 5. This one is called Dianetics. This is based on the book Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health by L. Ron Hubbard in 1950. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret. There was a large gap between me making Module 4 and now making Module 5 because I was so scared of talking about L. Ron Hubbard because he has such a bad reputation. You mention him to anyone, they're like, oh yeah, that stuff that evil person wrote that's all completely wrong, right? So I was thinking, how am I to talk about this and be taken seriously? But anyway, I made it, and here we are. The etymology of this word, Dianetics, means relating to thought. There's a very old Greek word, Dianetikos. Just look it up, it says, relating to thought. So this material is L. Ron Hubbard's observation and analyses of thought. It's important to understand that this material is not about L. Ron Hubbard, and his reputation or credibility do not enter this discussion, nor do the reputation or credibility of Scientology. Now, this material is an alternate science of health. In a way, that kind of means it's an alternate way of seeing, science, same, of health, right? It's an alternate way, it's an alternate perspective on health. We kind of live under this medical establishment model of health, where 99.9% of people in the world, as far as I can tell, all believe the exact same thing about health, which is kind of the stuff that we covered in the first two modules, which is that these physical approaches are the way to do health and treat health. So this is an alternative, and it's very different from the mainstream model. And I put this under the heading of objective thinking because when you're presented with something that is alternate to existing views, you have to step back and be very objective. Now, to help you to be as objective as possible, I'll make a couple of points up front. What I'm about to say is only a model. It's not the reality. Like, these are just words. This is just observations and analysis from L. Ron Hubbard, and my analysis as well, layered on top of that. And this all just points to possible existence, things that exist. Now, it's going to be up to you to discern if they exist and what their nature is. You're the only person who can really know this for sure as far as you're concerned. And the second point I'll make to prepare you is to let you know that this material can be triggering. As I said at the top, this is an alternate science of health. So that's, it's going to clash with existing beliefs, especially beliefs that are in the public consciousness. Those are beliefs that are just shared between people and just everyone's in agreement. Yep, this is exactly the way it is, 100% certain about that. So I recommend to you to create some space between your thoughts and your emotions and this material, and just calmly go through it and observe what happens for you. And don't do that thing that people always do. Not suggesting that you would do it, but I know it's a thing that people do, where you're like, this is just completely wrong. There's no way. It's just wrong. Okay, don't write anything off. Just calmly listen through the whole thing, and then just turn it over in your mind for a few days or a week, and then decide what's true or false. Okay, now let's get into it. This is going to be really interesting. Hubbard suggested that the primary command of all things in the universe is to survive. He said it's like an axiom of life. This is the absolute primary thing. And he suggested that there were 4 survival dynamics, which are kind of ways in which we try to survive. Okay? So you can see the first one on screen already. Survival dynamic number 1 is self, right? These are often quotes from L. Ron Hubbard from the book Dianetics. To reach the highest potential of survival in terms of self and his immediate symbiotes. So when it says his, by the way, what he's referring to is man, right? So he writes, he doesn't write, human or person or anything. He writes just man. Okay, so that's how I'm going to say it. I'm not meaning to offend anyone by not saying man or woman or not saying his or her. I think we're all mature enough to not worry about that. These are just ideas, So survival dynamic 1, self, to reach the highest potential of survival in terms of self and his immediate symbiotes. Okay? I'll explain more, but I want to throw a few more into the mix, okay? Survival dynamic 2, sex, to reach the highest potential of survival in terms of sex, the act and the creation of children and their rearing. So you're kind of already getting two ways that we can survive. Like we can survive by just keeping ourselves alive and the people right next to us alive. That will help us keep ourselves alive as well. Or we can actually create children. And you could think of that in two ways. You could think, okay, that if I raise children, then they're going to take care of me when I'm older. That will help my survival at that time. Or you could also think of it in a more kind of spiritual way that it's kind of passing on some of myself to my children and helping, the survival of my essence or something like that as an idea. Next, survival dynamic 3, group, to reach the highest potential of survival in terms of the group, whether civil, political, or racial, and the symbiotes. Now, just to clarify this word for you, symbiote, in case you're unfamiliar, I'll just give you a dictionary definition here from Google: an organism living in symbiosis with another. And then we have survival dynamic number 4, mankind, to reach the highest potential of survival in terms of mankind and the symbiotes of mankind. So you can see here there's kind of like a hierarchy to it, or kind of like an expanding circle of concern here. You can just focus on yourself. You can increase survival by the act and creation of children and rearing children. You can survive by increasing the survival odds of the group, or you can increase your survival odds by increasing the potential of mankind. So when we make ourselves better, when we make our spouse better, when we make our children better, when we make our group better, when we make mankind better, these all contribute to our survival. So he's suggesting that the way a human seeks to survive, according to this axiom of life, is to increase the potential and quality, let's say, of self, children, group, and mankind. So what he's suggesting to you is that this is how your, highest level of consciousness is kind of operating to help you survive. Like whether you're kind of like aware of it or not, he's suggesting that there's like this inbuilt rationality that is constantly and always trying to survive by these means. So that's the first point, and here's the second point, which is unconnected as yet, but I will connect it toward the end. Okay, this next concept is called standard memory banks. Memory, in his model, is very important. He suggests that when you are conscious, okay, when you're awake, when you're aware, when everything's functioning properly, all your memories are stored in what we may call the standard memory banks. Now, it's important to understand that standard memory banks is an idea. Okay, it's an abstraction. It's not directly pointing to any material or immaterial thing. It's just an abstract idea. Okay, so when you hear an abstract idea like that, you have to wonder, what could that be? Well, like what in me that I'm aware of might be my standard memory banks? Is there something that could be that he's referring to? So he goes on to talk more about these standard memory banks. He talks about the quality of your memory faculty. He says, the standard memory banks are perfect, recording faithfully and reliably. And he suggests that they're always recording and have infinite capacity. Not even just a large capacity, but an infinite capacity. So this is already pointing to the possibility that memory could be immaterial. Because think about it, your brain, that is like material, and clearly has finite volume. So how could you get infinite memory into finite volume, right? So perhaps here he's suggesting that memory is immaterial and a spiritual thing. He also suggests that the potentiality for recall is perfect. You can recall anything that has ever happened to you. Now, I know when I say that people will be like, oh, I don't think so. I can't recall anything that's ever happened to me. And it certainly does seem that way, doesn't it? That we can't recall everything that's ever happened to us. But he's saying that you can. So maybe you can. So before dismissing that idea, it's important to think, well, what if I actually can? And just try that on for size and think about it. You can declare it no later, but don't declare it no just yet. Okay? So standard memory banks. You're conscious. You have this perfect recorder. Everything that you experience is perfectly recorded and in you somehow, materially or immaterially. Somewhere it's there. Okay? And you have perfect access to it. He says that there's a thing, and he calls it the analytical mind. And here is the definition. That portion of the mind which perceives and retains experience data to compose and resolve problems and direct the organism along the four dynamics. So from that, it sounds like there's this like computer kind of thing that's like perfectly logical and just evaluates the situation with total rationality and perfect logicality and makes decisions based on the data in order to survive. So it takes in the situation and thinks, what could I do here to increase my survival? His specific point on this rationality that I've mentioned is a perfect computer that can never make a mistake, incapable of error, pure rationality. So how does that sound to you so far? Would you accept that there's a part of your mind that is perfect and incapable of error and capable only of pure rationality? So Hubbard suggests that the analytical mind is controlled by a thing that he calls the monitor, or the center of awareness, or the I. He seems to be suggesting that there is a highest point of control or highest point of awareness of a human organism, kind of like the absolute center of the being, and this controls the analytical mind, and it can influence the whole body, blood flow, heartbeat, everything. So how does that sound to you? That at the absolute center of your being almost is a part of you that's just completely in control and perfectly analytical. Is that a possibility and controls the body? Maybe it is. Next concept, the clear state. See how I'm doing this is I'm listing out all the concepts and then we'll put the concepts together towards the end. So Hubbard talks about a state of being called clear. He says the unaberrated individual. Now, I'm going to pause on that word, aberrate. Aberrate means, as far as I'm aware, to depart from normal. Or maybe it's even better in this case to say depart from natural. Or depart from the standard, ordinary way of working. So if we talk about the unaberrated individual, that would be an individual who has not departed from the correct function, right? Okay, the unaberrated individual, which he says is the clear, is motivated in his actions and decisions by all survival dynamics and not one alone. So the clear is kind of like in perfect rational alignment with these survival dynamics, takes in sensory experiential data, makes decisions, solves problems to maximize survival, and in all survival dynamics, not just self, but self, sex, community, and mankind. He indicates that this clear state is the natural state of man. He says a clear demonstrates the basic nature of mankind, and that basic nature has been found uniformly and invariably to be good. So this nature of man is sanity, it's happiness, it's survival. And what he's suggesting is any behaviors that aren't the behaviors that a perfectly rational clear would do are some sort of aberration, some sort of problem that's gone wrong and that I suppose need to be corrected, or survival will be compromised. So I have a question for you. Can this exist? I've written, ask yourself, does the clear state exist? Can it exist? Is anybody living today clear? Has anybody in history been clear? Are some people clearer than others? Could you ever be clear? Could you be clearer? See, these are questions that help you to see whether something exists or could exist or not. Next concept, reactive mind. Now, we talked about on the previous slide here about this aberrated individual. Well, we made a distinction between an individual who is not aberrated, unaberrated, clear, and therefore that implies an individual who is aberrated, right? We can see it. We look around. It doesn't seem like everybody we're seeing is a clear, right? So this concept, the reactive mind, is his attempt to explain what's going on with that. Why are people acting crazy? Why are people having mental health issues? Why are people acting strangely? Why are people acting irrationally? Okay, so he introduces this idea, reactive mind. The operating principles of the reactive mind. Operates exclusively on physical pain and painful emotion, not capable of differentiative thought, but acts on the stimulus-response basis. Have you ever had an argument with someone and it seemed that they were operating exclusively on physical pain and painful emotion? Have you ever been trying to talk perfectly logically with someone and just calmly stating what you're observing in reality and that what that implies, except they were getting angrier and more emotional and listening to you less and less? Well, this is what Hubbard is labeling the reactive mind. And it's not that people are just, occasionally in this state when they're in a heated argument. He implies that most people are constantly possessed by their reactive mind. And this reactive mind is almost on the level of an animal. It's a preconceptual mode of operation. It is far departed from this ideal analytical mind or clear state. Now, to me, this is the most interesting word in the entire book, and that word is engrams. Engrams is not a word that Hubbard invented. This word has been around for a longer time, and it basically points to this idea of a memory unit. I'm going to read what he says. So the reactive mind records events as cellular engrams when the conscious mind is unconscious. So let's say we're in a particular situation where the analytical mind is just not functioning, right? And someone's been highly irrational. Now, a lot of what Hubbard suggests in the book is that this unconsciousness is like something when you're like asleep or when you're under surgery or something like that. But my opinion of unconsciousness is just basically when you're just being lazy with your mind, okay? And just literally just not being conscious of reality. If you don't invoke your analytical mind to determine reality, if you're just lazy and assume that everything's going to happen automatically without your, conscious focus and deliberate processing of thoughts, then that's kind of like an unconscious state in which events will happen, but you will not properly process them, and integrate them consciously. And they will just remain in you somehow as unprocessed, uncertain experiential data that is kind of like signaling some sort of wrong information, and it just tells you the wrong stuff all the time. Perhaps in a Christian reading of this information, you might even call an engram a demon. Okay? It's kind of like gotten in there, it hasn't been processed, and it's like telling you wrong, irrational ideas all the time. Always. And sometimes it can be brought up to the surface and it can actually run things. Now, it's just a quick important note, I think. He talks about that engrams record during anesthetized surgery. And I will attest to this, that this is true, because I've had anesthetized surgery multiple times, and I've had flashback memories of the surgery. So if anyone thinks that when you're anesthetized, that you're not actually, that, it's just all, oh, no worries, you're just anesthetized, then you don't feel anything. I'll tell you from my personal experience that you are feeling it, okay? That it is happening, that you do go through that pain and you walk with that trauma in your life until you actually experience it. My more precise explanation of this engram idea is the totality of all unprocessed experience that is still emotionally charged. The false self produces actions based on fear and irrationality. Now, I'm sure you would probably have to agree that that kind of stuff, as I've put it, does exist, right? Unprocessed experience. If you have an experience, but you're too busy or too unfocused to kind of like really analytically understand what's going on, and it's just kind of like you had the experience, but it's unprocessed, right? And imagine if it's like an emotional thing. Well, it's like emotionally charged, and it's in there, kind of like still speaking to you and still trying to get its message to you and be processed. And all this unprocessed stuff that's just in there saying things in your head kind of is a false self. So for example, if you think, oh, I could do this wonderful thing in my life, and then you hear self-doubt say, oh, but that wouldn't work because of this, or you're not good enough for this reason, or something like that. Well, where does that come from? That's not analytical mind. That's like a demon. That's an engram. That's what it is, okay? Produces actions based on fear and irrationality. So now let's go deeper into engrams. The etymology and definition. I'll read this out to you. Borrowed from German engram, which was coined by German evolutionary biologist Richard Seaman in 1904. So this is 46 years before Hubbard's book. Ancient Greek, en meaning in, and grammar, writing, picture. Wiktionary, definition. A postulated physical or biochemical change in neural tissue that represents a memory. Now, I think it's interesting that Wiktionary says physical or biochemical. Interesting, right? It doesn't say or immaterial. It doesn't say of mind. You should remember that the entire scientific and medical establishment that we live under thinks that everything is material. It is a materialist, physicalist philosophy that we live under. So that's why it says that. It just says postulated physical or biochemical, change in neural tissue that represents a memory. So Hubbard's suggestion about engrams is that engrams are the cause of problems. He says, the engram and only the engram causes aberration. Remember, departure from natural. And psychosomatic illness. Psychosomatic simply meaning that which involves both the mind and the body. Illness. Intelligence is inhibited by engrams which feed false or improperly graded data into the analyzer. I really love this engrams idea. It suggests that what happens to us is that in times when we're emotional, or in times when we're lazy or unfocused or tired, that's when false ideas kind of get planted in us, and then they just in us, and they just feed all this irrationality and false data into the analyzer, and they make us make mistakes and do things wrong in our lives. And I really think that when you go to the doctor should explain to you not necessarily this model, but a model of equal value for people to understand their mental health, as opposed to saying, take this prescription drug developed by Big Pharma so that it zonks you out and you can't feel the pain, or for some other disease with physical symptoms in organs or heart or skin or anything, say take this big pharma medication. Yeah, it's going to stop the symptoms quick smart. Should I worry about my engrams? What's an engram? Take the pill, right? That's the medical establishment. And just to make things hyper clear, this aberration idea, these are my words, engrams aberrate an individual. They depart the individual from natural. If an individual acts chronically irrationally, they are aberrated. So do you know anyone who acts chronically irrationally? Could it be like, my suggestion is that that person has engrams. My suggestion isn't that they go to a Scientology church. My suggestion is that they have engrams and that they need to consciously look within themselves and discover what their engrams are and deal with them and release them, and then they will return to natural. My suggestion is that they don't go to a doctor and listen to all this physicalist, materialist stuff that is dictated by big pharmaceutical companies and put into the curriculum of all medical students. Now, I'll tell you about this Dianetic therapy that he actually came up with, which I think is pretty good, although still lacking. In my estimation, what must have happened is that L. Ron Hubbard stumbled on these ideas and he discovered that he was able to remove his own engrams, right? And become healthier and closer toward this clearer state. He would feel his mind more clear, he'd feel himself more calm, his thoughts more rational, and his actions more rational, and more creating, prosperity and abundance around him. And then he thought, well, how can I help other people to do this? And then he created this particular thing called Dianetic therapy. And he said the purpose of Dianetic therapy is to remove or process engrams and restore an individual to the clear state, and it deletes all the pain of a lifetime. The process he called auditing. The auditor guides the auditee to experience their engrams via recall. And to be more specific from what I know so far is the auditor basically just talks to the person being audited, the auditee, runs them through specific exercises and asks them, do you remember a time when something bad happened to you relating to this particular topic? And then they say, so what could you smell at the time? What could you see at the time? What could you hear at the time? What was happening? And they basically just take them back to the moment. And just help them basically recall that moment. And more often than not, there's some unprocessed experience there. So as the person just simply recalls what happened to them, they experience what they didn't have time to, or didn't believe they should, or were too afraid to experience at that time. And I know from my own experience that this is a real thing. I've described in my book, Conscious Movement, The Key to Releasing Pain, basically this exact same process, except instead of having an auditor, you're just by yourself and you're doing movement to stimulate the engrams, right? So instead of having an auditor to guide you, you're just kind of like searching through the body yourself for the engrams. But basically the same thing happens. You begin to notice them, and then you actually focus more deeply on them and recall the experiences that they're related to, and then they release. So I know that there's a process that is very real, that's very related to what he's saying. So I was always very frustrated when people just dismiss Dianetics like out of hand without even thinking about it, because I'm like, well, I know that it's a real thing. And for you to say that that's not real, you must be saying what I'm saying is not real. Anyway, taking it personally just there. So my question to you would be, is this true? Is it true that an individual can recall moments in their life and then release the, charged energy that's kind of attached to that memory, and then kind of like have realizations, become clearer, become less aberrated, fix problems in life? And I would say it's certainly true. I know it's true because I discovered it independently. Almost every day I process engrams and my pain lessons. That takes a long time, takes years, but I explained it all in my book, Conscious Movement, The Key to Releasing Pain. And so I would therefore put it to you that absolutely yes, anyone, any individual, either with an auditor, if they choose, with a partner, or by themselves, can search back, can recall their past experience and process their engrams, and then arrive at much better mental health. And as they arrive at much better mental health, they'll find that also their physical health improves simultaneously because they're directly connected. So let me tell you what I think the higher point of looking at this model is. Because as I said at the beginning, this literally is just a model, right? Like everything you need to know about ever in life is right there inside you. Okay, you don't need this information, okay, because it's already there. You only need to look inside and you'll find it. But what this material does is it points inside so that you can see it more easily, right? Now, you don't have to keep the words that he has said, right? You don't need to worry about auditing. You don't need to worry about the word clear. Like you can call all these ideas anything you want. But basically what he's suggesting is that we can achieve perfect mental health simply by dealing with the false self that has been implanted in us at various times during moments of unconsciousness, during moments of irrationality, during moments of heightened emotion, during moments of laziness, during moments of exhaustion, all sorts of things like that. And ultimately, pointing at the things that seem to be inside us and how we work up at this higher level, right, outside of the physical, is key to knowing ourselves. It's just key to the primary objective of life, to know what's going on with ourselves. What is all this about? What is life about? Who am I? What is my purpose in all of creation and existence? And I think this stuff helps. I hope you like this stuff. I know it's stuff that the mainstream rejects and thinks is ridiculous and evil, but I think it's really valuable, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Good luck. I see you in the next module, which is about another fascinating science called bioenergetics.